Let's begin with our top story. The U.S. says it will not defend Kurdish-led SDF forces from Turkish attacks in northern Syria. Pentagon officials say U.S. forces have evacuated 2 observation posts in Syria along the Turkish border. In a statement, the White House said Ankara will now be responsible for all ISIS fighters captured in the area in the last 2 years. It said having defeated the so-called ISIS caliphate, U.S. forces will no longer be in the immediate area. Meanwhile, Turkish President Tayyip Erdogan said Ankara is determined to clear the border region of terrorists and ensure Turkey's security. The SDF said the withdrawal is a breach of commitments by the U.S. that will have an extremely negative impact on the war against ISIS. The developments came hours after a phone call between President Erdogan and his U.S. counterpart, Donald Trump. Earlier, Russian President Putin announced the end of conflict operations in Syria and called for a political solution. We're going to go firstly now to Moscow, where we're joined by our correspondent, Ross Cullen. Ross, thanks for joining us. Now, President Erdogan, Ross, regularly interacts with Russian President Vladimir Putin as a key military and diplomatic ally of the Syrian government. How would Moscow view a Turkish incursion?
This actually might play positively for Moscow if this goes ahead, this Turkish incursion into northeastern Syria. One thing that Moscow has said is that Kurdish rights must be respected, but that respect must come under a single state. So Russia wants to see the return to Syrian control by Damascus, President Bashar al-Assad, of all of Syria. The territorial integrity of Syria as it was in 2011, before the start of the civil war, must be returned to government control, and that would include the Kurdish-controlled areas in northeastern Syria, respecting the rights of Kurdish people in that area, but that they must accept that the Syrian government will eventually have control of those Kurdish-run areas. Moscow has been readying itself for a possible mediation role when it comes to this. Now, the Kurds may see themselves abandoned, perhaps, by the US on one hand, if the US is going to step aside, not stand in the way of any possible Turkish incursion. The Kurds then may look to Moscow for more support, saying, well, can you help us? Could you guarantee our security? Moscow, of course, would say, well, if we can, it's going to be coming through the control of the Syrian government. So obviously, as you said, Russia is a major backer of the Assad regime, and Turkey supports the anti-Assad regime, but they have been working together also, as you mentioned, on other projects.
Well, Ross, what impact would Turkish military action then have on the Astana process, political negotiations on Syria's future?
Well, one issue that the Russian and Turkish presidents seem to have overcome is the fact that, as I mentioned, they support different sides in the conflicts. And over the several years where we've had Russia supporting the Assad regime and Turkey supporting those anti-government rebels, that hasn't totally impacted on their cooperation, along with Iran, in the Astana framework. We've seen regular commitments and regular meetings in Turkey, Russia, to try to guarantee this framework will work as they try to build towards possible peace negotiations for the end of the deal, for the end of the war. Some kind of peace deal may come out of this. So that doesn't seem to have impacted on the Putin-Erdogan working relationship. There's problems on the ground in Syria, if you like, hasn't impacted their relationship so far. So it doesn't seem to be under particular threat at the moment, that Putin-Erdogan friendship.
Ross, thank you for your reporting today. That was Ross Cullen speaking to us from Moscow. Let's now get some analysis on this story. We're joined now by Ahmed Alialu, who is a political analyst based in Turkey. Ahmed, thank you for your time today. How likely, Ahmed, is it that a Turkish military operation will begin in northeast Syria anytime soon?
It must be clear that Turkey is not conducting any operation against the Kurdish people. It is basically against the PKK and its offshoot, the YPG and the SDF in Syria. So Turkey doesn't have any problem with the Kurdish population in the region, whether in Turkey, in Iraq, in Syria, or anywhere. There are lots of ministers in the cabinet in Turkey who are Kurdish. There are lots of the members of the ruling AK party who are Kurdish. So the problem is basically with those who choose to pick up arms against the government, and that is the PKK and its own organizations like the YPG in Syria. And that's why Turkey is determined to go ahead with the operation. This is the third cross-border operation in which Turkey will try to clear its border from these elements who are terrorists, launching a terrorist attack against Turkish people and Kurdish people in the southern parts of Turkey.
Well, Ahmed, as you well know, the U.S. and others say a Turkish operation east of the Euphrates would in fact create a space for ISIS revival. What are your thoughts on that?
It's not true. At the very beginning, Turkey vowed that it's ready to fight ISIS and Daesh with the help of the United States and any other power. They said to the ally in Washington that you cannot turn a blind eye on the terrorist attacks that is happening against Turkey by these elements, the YPG elements. So Daesh can be defeated, and Turkey succeeded to defeat Daesh at the very beginning of the rise of Daesh in Kobani, Ain al-Arab in Syria. And then the Washington or the Americans, they decided to choose the YPG as their ally to defeat Daesh, while Turkey was always asking them to try Turkey, and if they didn't succeed, then they can move to any other ally they want on the ground. But the problem is, again, the United States is not taking the sensitivity of this issue seriously. Till this moment, they understand that Turkey will go ahead with the operation regardless of any concerns of the United States. And Turkey understands the geopolitics, or especially now what's happening in the United States and the Trump's status to go ahead with the operation. It's a very good timing for Turkey to start and embark on the operation very soon, I believe.
All right, we'll leave it there at that, Ahmed. But of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time out to speak to us here at Indus News. On to news coming out of Baghdad now, where 8 more protesters have died in clashes between protesters and security forces. The government has blamed what it calls malicious hands for the unrest, in which 109 people have died and 6,000 have been injured. The Interior Ministry says an investigation is underway to determine who was behind the violence. The Interior Ministry spokesman said protesters have burned 51 public buildings and 8 political party headquarters. Iraq's Grand Ayatollah Ali al-Sistani has urged protesters and security forces to end the violence. Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi has pledged to speak with protesters without preconditions. Abdul Mahdi defended the security forces, saying they only use force in extreme cases of self-defense. Well, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan will leave for China on a 3-day visit today to discuss regional issues and bilateral ties. During his visit, the Prime Minister will hold separate meetings with Chinese President Xi Jinping and Premier Li Keqiang. The two countries will discuss the expansion of the China-Pakistan economic corridor projects. They will also deliberate implementation of Phase 2 of the China-Pakistan Free Trade Agreement to boost trade ties. This will be Imran Khan's 3rd visit to China within a year. Well, as I said, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan today will depart for China on that visit that promises to cement the economic relationship between the close allies. Founded upon more than 40 years of diplomatic and defense cooperation, the Sino-Pakistan relationship has in recent years focused on investment and trade. In consultations with decision makers in Beijing, Khan is expected to discuss the next phase of the multi-billion-dollar China-Pakistan Economic Corridor program. More in this report.
4 years ago, Pakistan emerged from its own decade-long war on terrorism. Tens of thousands of people had been killed, and the economy was in tatters because the country had become unsafe for foreign investors. President Xi Jinping and his Belt and Road Initiative was meant to change that, a program designed to integrate China's economy with its neighbors and developing economies around the world. Visiting Islamabad 4 years ago, Xi said CPEC would become a showcase of the Belt and Road Initiative. He said Pakistan had been selected as a thank you for its central role in ending China's diplomatic isolation in 1972. The impact of CPEC on Pakistan's economy has been dramatic.
I think it's a stimulus for economic growth. when it will be in place, inshallah, by 2030 with ML1 there, energy project delivering, which will happen by 2025, and all the highways connecting Kashmir to Gwadar, it will be great stimulus to our economy.
Back in 2015, Pakistan was suffering from a severe power shortage that starved export-oriented industries of electricity. Power cuts lasting between 8 and 12 hours a day were commonplace, making life miserable for everyone, particularly during the brutal summer months. By the time Imran Khan became Prime Minister in August 2018, the power supply gap had been plugged by CPEC projects.
When the initial phase was started, we were losing around 2% of GDP because lack of energy and agriculture and other infrastructure as well. So with the first phase almost completing, I guess that 2% has been capped.
The Prime Minister's latest visit to China coincides with the end of the early harvest phase of the 15-year CPEC program. The single largest infrastructure project, the 400-kilometre Multan-Sukkur motorway, will soon be inaugurated. Both governments are now in the process of negotiating an $8 billion revamp of Pakistan's dilapidated railway network.
In first phase, with certain sectors, I think the weaker links in the whole railway infrastructure would be taken care of, and then gradually it would move on towards a fast-moving railway.
Imran Khan is looking to steer the next phase of CPEC towards job creation and social services development. The key element is the creation of special economic zones across Pakistan. They would provide platforms for local businesses to form manufacturing ventures with investors from China and other friendly nations. The Prime Minister's visit to China comes at a critical moment for both economies. China has been hit by a range of punitive tariffs from President Donald Trump. At the same time, Khan has begun a program of governance and economic reforms. Once again, the close allies are working together to overcome serious challenges.
Now, a total curfew and communications blackout has left people in occupied Kashmir with no access to doctors and medical care. In a report, the New York Times revealed the plight of Kashmiris in their healthcare crisis. The report said internet shutdown has cut off online delivery of medicine to cancer patients. It said with mobile networks disabled, doctors can't consult specialists even under life-threatening situations. The newspaper said doctors in the valley are afraid to speak to the media due to the threat of being fired and harmed by Indian troops. Citing several medics, the report said hundreds left in emergency and many of them have died due to a communication blockade. Well, with Indian-occupied Kashmir under that crushing lockdown and radio silence for the past 64 days, the Indian government has still expressed total ignorance of the plight of Kashmiris, saying it has no information of any clampdown in the occupied valley. The Home Ministry issued that statement in response to the right to information request by activist Venkatesh Nayak. In its reply, the ministry said it has no information on the names and locations of thousands of arrested Kashmiris. The ministry said it has directed the query to occupied Kashmir, saying information might be available with the state government. Interestingly, though, the application cannot be forwarded to the valley's government as the Indian Information Act is not applicable in the occupied valley. Responding, the activist said how officials could not have any information about the valley when it is currently under presidential rule. Now, in India, Nagaland rebel leader Twigaling Muiva says New Delhi's annexation of occupied Kashmir is unacceptable. In an interview, Muiva said revocation of Kashmir's special status was a violation of past pacts and the history of the region. Rejecting New Delhi's decision, the rebel leader said the move is nothing short of betrayal. The National Socialist Council of Nagalim leader Muiva is pursuing a separate sovereign state for the Naga people. In other news, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif says any peace deal in Afghanistan should not favor foreigners. The foreign minister says Iran supports peace talks, taking everyone within the country on board. He said foreign powers should not exclude one or several groups from the process by exerting influence to serve their vested interests. Members of the Presidential Candidate Council have raised concerns over the electoral process and compilation of results in Afghanistan. At a press conference in Kabul, several candidates asked the country's election commission not to count the non-biometric votes. They alleged that district officials and police chiefs were bribed to fill ballot boxes. The presidential elections held last month saw a low turnout amidst allegations of voter fraud and technical glitches. They also criticized the Election Commission's delay in results. Members of the council said with such low turnout, school students would have counted the votes of an election by now. Well, on the 18th anniversary of the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan, the Taliban say America has totally failed in its ambitions. In a statement, the group said they have brought the U.S. down to its knees in the country. It said the only way to end the war is a complete withdrawal of U.S. forces from the shattered country. The statement said the group will fight U.S. forces for another 18 years unless their demands are met. Denouncing presidential polls held last month, the Taliban said what it called the selected government has failed. Meanwhile, in Afghanistan, a group of 11 key Taliban prisoners have been released in exchange for 3 Indian hostages. Joining us now is Mr. James Dorsey to discuss this further. He's a Singapore-based political analyst. James, as always, thank you for your time. James, what do you make of the Afghan Taliban's claim that America has totally failed in its ambitions in Afghanistan over the last 18 years?
The proof will be in the pudding, but essentially that is true. With other words, 18 years after the beginning of the war, the United States is currently negotiating its withdrawal from Afghanistan with the Taliban, the very group that it was overthrowing in 2001. And it's leaving behind a country in which, with enormous political and economic problems, in which it's very, at least probable or possible, that the Taliban will come back into government, and again, possibly as Afghanistan's sole rulers.
Now, can this sort of a statement by the Taliban jeopardize the resumption of talks between the group and the U.S.?
I don't think that they're going to have much effect. I mean, I think they will be taken as par for the course and as expected. I think more fundamentally, there are lessons to be learned from all of this. First of all, and that's not exclusively American, we see that in other wars by other countries too, traditional militaries have the greatest difficulty in fighting non-state actors who employ asymmetric warfare. The other lesson I think one learns is that victory is not simply determined by whether or not one has succeeded militarily. Victory is secured if indeed you rebuild and reconstruct the country that has been basically devastated by war. And that's something that the Americans failed to do for both practical problems as well as the United States' continuous grappling with the notion of state building and nation building.
Very well, James, we'll leave it there at that. And of course, as always, we appreciate you taking your time out to share your thoughts with us here at Indus News. Viewers, we're going to go now into a short break. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back with plenty more news after that. Well, Asian markets have traded mixed as investors ahead of a fresh round of U.S.-China trade negotiations later this week. Japan's Nikkei 225 fell marginally, while Shanghai's stocks dipped almost 1%. South Korea's Kospi recovered with fractional gains after sliding earlier. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index lost over 1%. Australia's DAX shored up, over 0.5% in gains, while London's FTSE traded over 0.5% higher. Time now to find out what the weather is like around the world. And with that, you're all caught up. Thank you for watching this bulletin here at Indus News.